Okay, hello. We've probably all seen pictures like those here, like in our daily commutes, for example, where we see bikes from bike-sharing systems thrown or fallen into rivers or alike. Similarly, we've probably also seen these pictures where the same bikes from bike-sharing systems have been either kicked over or fell over and nobody kind of cared to pick them up again. But then on the other hand, on a more positive note, we've probably also seen situations like those where a bike-sharing system is well integrated into a city, it's lined up nicely, all of them are functional, and they are actually used. And last but not least, there are even scenarios where bike-sharing providers as well as cities invest into an electric version of those bikes, apparently because there's enough value. So the natural question now that arises is, how is it possible that these two states coexist? And with that, I want to welcome you to our presentation, What Makes Bike Sharing Work? Insights from 43 million kilometers of European cycling data. The talk is going to show a few data-heavy analysis, and we want to make sure, nevertheless, that we will present it in a way that everyone understands it to make it as accessible as possible. Who are we? We are Georg, Felix, and Martin. And we do very different things, all kind of related to data, but what unites us is our love for quantitative traffic analysis, and that's also the reason why we are here today. We think that quantitative traffic analysis is a great way to make use of the abundance of traffic data that is accumulated every day in order to provide a better and hopefully easier life for all of us. Before we now dive deeper into the European bike-sharing system data, first a quick recap about Nextbikes in Marburg. Back in 2020, we scraped Nextbike data, similar as we are going to present today, in Marburg for roughly 8 months. Marburg is a small city that you can see here annotated by a red dot in the center of Germany, roughly 100 kilometers north of Frankfurt am Main. It's a university city with roughly 80,000 people living there. And the following stats are, given that context, pretty impressive, in my opinion. It's first of all, in Marburg, there are 230 bikes, share bikes from Nextbikes, distributed among 37 stations. And now the astonishing numbers, in my opinion, it's that the people within 8 months traveled 323,000 kilometers on those bikes. Again, distributed across 208,000 bike trips. Now, we analyzed a few more of those numbers essentially in analysis that required a bit more domain knowledge about that city. If you're interested in those, then feel free to check out the link to a blog and the video. Now you might ask, where does the data come from for all of that? And the answer is here, the Nextbike API. Shout out go out to U-Bahn-Verleih, who reconstructed the Nextbike API endpoint, which we used for the Marburg study here. When we then looked into the data and into the API a bit more, it turns out that of course, the data does not only serve Marburg data, but also data for all other European cities. So that kind of kicked off the project that we are going to see today. Okay, so what we are going to do today is an extension of that Marburg analysis to whole Europe. And that will be bigger by means of the number of bikes, but also by means of the professionalism of how we acquired the data and how rigorously we analyzed it. What you can see here is a graph that is now based on the system of Europe as opposed to a single city like Marburg, and we can see the number of available bikes here. You can see that the number of available bikes fluctuates between 50,000 and 55,000. At every given point in time. If we were to zoom in, we could also see some, for example, weekly seasonality. It doesn't require much attention, actually, to see that there seems to be something off. So in the center of the plot, we can see a steep decline and a steep increase again of that number. And that would, first of all, of course, suggest that there's some data acquisition error that could have happened for sure. But the data in between looks consistent enough that it probably is not an error on our side. And if you then look at the times, beginning of December and beginning of March, which correspond to winter, it turns out that Poland removes all the Nextbikes in their system. What you're going to see today are then more of these in-depth analysis, first on a European level, and then also a few examples of specific cool cities. And the meat of the presentation is really the comparison between different cities, because based on that we can derive what makes a bike sharing system work, the title of our talk. So we are going to present that for regular e-bike, for regular share bikes, but we're also in the privileged situation that we've scraped electric bike data at an unprecedented scale, which is interesting, for example, for questions: what are the discharge rates, how often is it recharged, and how does it depend on weather, for example. If you want to get started yourself, we have provided a data set that comprises of 25 million data records for you to get started immediately, essentially. You can use it in order, for example, to look into your city. You can use it to, for example, build apps or ask questions about privacy. Side note, ask us about privacy in the questions, please. And if using a data set, which, by the way, only requires a single line of Python to download it to your machine, is not your cup of tea, then feel free to be invited to check out our interactive demo, which allows you to look into the number of bikes in Europe and also the transition rates of bikes between positions in cities and also beyond, actually. And with that, I would like to hand over to our data analysis expert, Felix.
Thank you, Martin. Let's first compare the two data sets. Martin set out to analyze one city. Now we have 267 cities. Marburg has 230 bikes. We're now close to 95,000 in total. 208,000 trips have become 27 million trips, and we have gathered around 43 million kilometers of bike sharing distance covered. That's more than 1,000 times around the Earth. So yes, this is a big data set. That's great. Yay. What can we do with it, though? Well, first thing is descriptive analysis, obviously, and we can start out with simple things and, for example, have a look at what kind of systems we actually have in Europe. And surprisingly, most of them, 200, are free-floating or hybrid. That means you do not have to return the bikes at stations, but it's rather user-friendly, and you can drop them off everywhere, door-to-door mobility if you want. Also, surprisingly, close to 200 are already electrified, so they comprise at least a share of electric bikes, which to me was surprising because I personally mainly use classic human-powered bikes. But we can... Yay for the e-bike fans. We can also do more advanced stuff like looking at ride and usage characteristics. For example, hourly rates of rentals, comparing weekdays and weekends. If we look at weekdays, we see classic two peaks, people getting to work in the morning and going home in the afternoon. The red line, on the other hand, is for the weekends, and we see a wider peak in the afternoon. People get up later, but they are way more active during the night. Comparing bicycles and pedelecs, we don't see a lot of difference here. However, we see distinct differences in speed. As you might expect, once we have a motor, we go faster, and the pedelecs throughout those 43 million kilometers just go a little bit faster. Quite funnily, we also see a difference between weekends and weekdays in average speeds. So once we don't have appointments, we don't have places to be, we just go around for leisure and take it a little bit easier. That's evident from the data. Now, Martin already mentioned the e-bikes, and we seem to have a lot of fans here. And one thing we could do, since we have so many cities in different climate zones, was correlate electric consumption and temperature at noon. What we see here is a decline in energy consumption the hotter it gets. That's physically understandable, since the internal resistance of batteries is actually decreasing with increasing temperature. So that makes a lot of sense, but the scale of this was unknown before. Why is this important? Well, we need to swap more batteries once we use more electricity, and that is also something we can observe in the data set, because whenever there's a significant increase in state of charge, we are sure a battery was swapped. And interestingly, most bikes receive new batteries almost every day, or at least every second or third day, which surprised me a lot, because you might expect now that they only swap empty batteries, but that's not at all the case. It's more or less a flat line between 10 and 80% state of charge, so they are quite indifferent to how empty that battery is. They just swap whatever bike they are close to. So I don't know if that's optimal, but it seems to leave some room for improvement here. Finally, we come to the performance, the thing why we're here today, and we measure that in trips per day per bike, or short TDB. Why is that a good measure? Well, from the operator's perspective, of course, you earn money when bikes are used, and since most of those systems are publicly funded, that's good for all of us. On the other hand, from a citizen or societal perspective, it's also nice because it basically means it's a good system and all of us like to use it and it's actually useful. So TDB is the measure we chose. Here we are comparing, again, bicycles and pedelecs, and we see that pedelecs are actually used a lot more often than classic bicycles. Users just like them more. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because what we were actually interested in was a European comparison, and that's what you see here. On this map, we have all 267 cities. The market size denotes the quantity of bikes, and the color denotes the TDB, so the usage level. Whilst blue means low usage, very small numbers for TDB, red means a lot of usage. At first glance, you can already spot there's far more blue dots than red dots. That means lots of systems do not perform very well. Obviously, we asked ourselves, why is that? And since geographic location and system size could not answer that question, we set out to gather more data, 108 indicators to be exact. We used different sources of openly available data, for example, Eurostat for demographics, age, income levels, etc., OpenStreetMap to construct the mobility networks, bicycle lanes, public transport, and so on. Statista releases other numbers for demographics. The European Union releases election data. SRTM allows you to compute hilliness in a city to know how much up and down there is, and so on. So all in all, we had 108 indicators. And we finally got to implement a statistical model, allowing us to analyze what actually makes for good performance. So the first step in that model is actually pre-processing, and the first part is a logarithmic transformation for some variables. Why do we do that? It actually linearizes the correlation between the TDB and some of the indicators. Second thing is multicollinearity control. What does that mean? Well, we just throw out variables that are redundant. So if two things say the same thing, we just keep one, because having 2 times the same thing would deteriorate the quality of the model. The model itself is then set up with the remaining variables after preprocessing, and it's a rather simple OLS model, so ordinary least squares model, which is basically a linear model that just sums up all the variables with a coefficient for each. Then the bidirectional stepwise regression part begins, and there we basically throw out or add one variable at a time, refit the OLS model, and compute the AIC. The AIC is a criterion how well we can actually predict performance in that specific model, and we continue to do that until we have basically the model with the best AIC that we can have. This model will then have the optimal set of variables, and this must not be all of the variables, but in our case, it was only 18 of the initial variables. Those 18 variables are too many to go through each on their own, so we clustered them into 4 groups. And those are basically the 4 groups that allow us to say in which city bike sharing works well, meaning it is used very well, the number of TDB is very high. So the first part are actually societal factors. For example, share of young people who are more prone to bike sharing. Election results, actually, so the political mindset of a city is decisive. Also the inclination towards sharing economy, measured by the rate of Airbnb usage, for example. Second number is structural factors of the cities. Population density, land use shares, is it rather residential, industrial, are there many parks, etc., or the number of amenities per square kilometer. That means, for example, is there interesting stuff in a city? Is it actually worth going around by bike, or is there nothing interesting to do? The mobility landscape in itself, so for example, the number of registered cars per inhabitant, or bike sharing system characteristics themselves. So we've seen before that e-bikes lead to higher usage, bike density, etc. So those are the 4 groups that tell us whether bike sharing will be successful in a city or not. And it gives us some clues, but the diversity of those variables also shows how complex it actually is, how many factors factor into the success of a sharing system. There was only a very brief overview of our methods and results, and we've published this all as an open source paper along with the data, so we'll share the link to download this later on. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you very much. But I find it hard to impress anyone with a paper that's maybe hard to reproduce. So for that reason, we wanted to give the means of development back into your hands, the open source community. So what does that mean? The full data set is available on GitHub. You can also download our ETL pipeline and inspect our code, what we did to process this data. And even easier, you can download the data set from Hugging Face. You only need 2 lines of Python that are listed here to download the about 750 megabytes of data. Play around with it, but before you download it right now, please bear with me for a second because I would like to explain how we compiled this data set and what the limitations are, because we're on the science track here. So let's look into it. The Nextbike API basically is a server by Nextbike. We don't know what happens behind it, but it serves the Android and iOS apps. Those apps display to the user where bikes are located, what technical parameters they have. Are they electric? Are they not? What is the state of charge? Can I reach my destination? But also their IDs, crucially, so we can trace those IDs through time. There are also information on stations, if that's relevant to anyone. So for example, the filling degree of a station or maintenance state. So what we basically did was we took 1 scrape every minute and scraped this API throughout a year and basically detected trips within this data set. So how does this tracking and tracing work? You see, for example, 3 bikes here in the left corner of the city is just an example. And through time, they are going to disappear at some point. Disappearing means either they are reserved or directly rented. We cannot distinguish between those 2 processes. And they will reappear at some point, so they are returned basically to a station or just in free-floating systems, just returned on a street side. And on that basis, we can infer origins and destinations, and this is basically the trips table you will find in the dataset. This has 2 major limitations. We have no information on the actual route that was chosen. So if you need routing information, you would have to impute it using a routing algorithm, for example. And we cannot detect round trips. So round trips for transportation reasons are not so important except for 2 cases. We have cargo bikes. Cargo bikes have to be returned at the same station where they were rented in many cases. So there might be a significant discrepancy here. And a second case is touristic bike sharing schemes. For example, in the Canary Islands, there are bike sharing systems where you have only 1 or 2 stations on the whole island. And the purpose is not to do transportation, but to explore the city and surroundings. So for touristic reasons. So with those 2 limitations, we can now trace bikes through time. And first thing I did was to look up, Martin, your next bikes from Marburg. What happened to them 3 years after your analysis? Did they live happily ever after? And yeah, what I found was probably yes, but not in the way I expected, because they moved to Cyprus. This is actually a promo pic from Nextbike in Cyprus, in Limassol, I think. It's next to the Mediterranean Sea, so they have a nice warm retirement. Maybe Nextbike even retired them, moved them for operational reasons, but I like the retirement story more. But wait a second, in that picture there's a frame number. It's 11554. Are you a Nextbike from Marburg, maybe? So I looked it up, and no, the bike is not from Marburg, but from Wiesbaden. And there are some friends from Rüsselsheim joining in Cyprus, but there were reinforcements from Frankfurt for all 3 cities. So I uncovered like a whole network here, and upon digging deeper, I actually found 17 disconnected graphs of cities within this data set where bikes were moved for at least 10 trips between cities. This can either be due to transportation reasons, so people just picking the bike to ride to the neighboring city, or due to operational reasons, so fluctuating demand making it necessary to rescale the systems, or maybe even a technical overhaul taking place in the city and old bikes becoming available. So this is a nice rabbit hole for data scientists here. But if you're not a data scientist, if you're more of an interactive learner, I've got something prepared for you too. Please drop Playing City Skylines 2 now and head over to bikesharingflowmap.de. We've got a little live demo on this, so I'm going to switch over my screen here. I hope you can see it. Yeah. In that live demo, you can explore all the 267 cities that were surveyed. You can click on them and discover how the trips per day in bike actually are. So have a look how well your city performs. And crucially, you can load the data set of trips and jump into cities. And Felix, do you have internet? So sorry for a spoiler now, but you will see an interactive and automatic aggregation of those bike sharing flows within a city, and you can explore.
There they are.
There it is. And you can then explore which areas of the city are more frequented by bike sharing, which ones are maybe less frequented, are there asymmetries in the flows, all those interesting aspects. The reason I picked Dresden here was that Dresden is the most performant city in Germany. It has the highest TDB at 5.7, so 5.7 rentals per day in bike, basically. Yep. Give it up for Dresden in this case. And what is interesting is that there are some factors from the OLS model that Felix presented earlier that speak for Dresden. So Dresden has a university, is actually younger than the German average. So it has the right population that is maybe inclined to use sharing, to use apps, to use digital solutions for mobility. And has a quite high density of bikes, so people can rely on finding a bike when they need one. But there are also factors that require local domain knowledge. And this is where you come in. So you have local domain knowledge in those 267 cities, probably, or hopefully, and you can maybe fit the pieces into the puzzle. What I found about Dresden is that there's a pretty strict return area policy, which means you may not return your bike in certain closed areas. You may return your bike into stations, virtual stations, or along major highways for free, or for a little fee into residential areas, for example. That means that those bikes aggregate a bit. They accrue along major highways and along transportation hubs. What you saw, for example, in the flow map is the station in Dresden-Neustadt, which acts as a transportation hub for that part of the city. So this means that people can rely on finding a bike when they need one, for example. Also, Dresden has a pretty dense public transit network and a good integration between the public transit system and the next bike. So that might be a reason why people are more inclined to use it, actually. All right. With that, I'm going to give it back to you and to Felix.
All right, pretty exciting, Georg, thank you. So in the last 30 minutes, or close to 30 minutes, we gave you basically everything to get started yourself. You have our full code on GitHub to scrape your own data. You have the full data set ready to download, and we've even set up the web tool so you can explore your data easily. So we hope to inspire some of you to collect mobility data too and make it available to the community. When you think about doing so, you might have one question. That are the legal aspects. And as we're not lawyers, we cannot give you any legal advice, but we can share our personal experience on that regard. But before I do so, I want to point you towards two things. First one is the Urheberrechtsgesetz, paragraph 60D in Germany. Probably many of you know it, maybe some don't. It specifically concerns text and data mining for the purposes of scientific research. And with that in place, we actually already have a lot of freedom for non-commercial, non-profit reasons. And if we now ask what are purposes of scientific research, there's another interesting thing. Just this month here in Hamburg, it was decided that the intention to make a dataset available via open access is sufficient to be considered scientific research. So both of those things are worth looking them up. Yeah, so both of these are worth looking them up. Read them yourself. It's both of them not very long, so yeah, just check it out. It, as I said, is a great basis, already gives us some freedom to do interesting stuff and make it available and do something for the greater good. However, what was our experience? Well, after we saw that our data collection process works and we clearly planned from the beginning on to release the full data set open source, we contacted the legal department of our university, but after 6 months and dozens of emails, we were not really smarter than before and had no conclusive decision from them. So we did the obvious thing and just approached Nextbike and asked them, is this fine with you? And turns out it actually was. So thanks Nextbike. Yeah, so this one was for you, Nextbike. So even their CEO liked some LinkedIn posts on the topic. So I guess they're happy with it, and that would also be our ultimate advice. Just ask the people who own the data beforehand from our personal experience. If you find the right persons who are also data enthusiasts, also great collaborations can arise from such questions. It's really important to find the right person. Normally the press people are not the right persons, but rather the data people. But yeah, as I said, really great stuff can emerge, and often the right people are really happy to collaborate and may even give you more data. So with that being said, we hope we inspired some of you to think about what kind of data you could gather and what kind of analysis you could run on our data set and so on. So we'll be happy to discuss all of that after our talk. And ultimately, of course, we hope that we see less bikes swimming in rivers because they're not made for that, but they are made to be ridden. And yeah, we hope to see many more well-used, well-run bike-sharing programs in the future. And with that, we all would like to thank you, the audience, of course, the organizers of the Congress, which is a great experience so far for us, and of course, all the open data suppliers that we were able to use, especially Nextbike. So thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions now, or of course, after our talk, or maybe you want to grab lunch with us, whatever, just hit us up. Thank you.
Thank you, Georg, Felix, and Martin, for your amazing talk, and thank you for your service for the community with all your nice tools. I see already people lining up with questions, so if you have questions, please line up at those microphones, and also consider asking questions on the internet, on Matrix. It's in the Matrix space, hall 1, like a word, or if you are on IRC, then it's hashtag 39C3 hall-1 for any questions on IRC. Let's start with the first question on microphone 1, please.
So you asked for it, so I'm going to ask for it. What about privacy?
So I think the most important aspect here is there's no user IDs attached. We don't know which user used which bike, how often. The only conceivable attack would be a background attack. So if you had background knowledge on the system, you could infer one trip at maximum. There's actually a little backup slide we brought. There's a GCN video. Some of you may know GCN, Global Cycling Network. It's a YouTube channel. It's great for road cycling and so on. And they did a video on city cycling in Berlin. And in this video, there was one frame where you saw two bikes together, two bikes parked together. So I did ask myself, when did bikes 19433 and 18309 park together? So there was only one occurrence. You can pin down a point where this video was taken. You could also pin down one trip if you knew which bike was taken. That is the caveat here, yes. But it's basically what is available.
Okay, thank you.
Microphone number 3.
So full disclosure, I do work at a Nextbike competitor. But if you had access to, again, with respect to privacy, any data point that you really wanted to look into, what would that be and why?
What? I can start. Maybe we all have different desires. So I personally think, yeah, again with that privacy part in mind, but where all mobility data analysis becomes really interesting is studying patterns of individuals or habits. So somehow being able to analyze that data would be very interesting. Also, in our university research, we had mobility experiments where we had full tracking data via smartphone. So combining that and being able to track full mobility chains or full mobility habits would for me be super interesting, because especially in cities where there's so much multi and intermodal traveling going on, I think that opens up so many more options, basically, to really understand why people are moving, from where to where they are moving, what trip chains or what chains of means of mobility do they actually use. So that would be a huge benefit to just understand more of that.
Yeah, maybe those intermodal trips would be pretty interesting, because I have the suspicion that bike sharing has often a feeder effect for public transit. So it supports public transit. It's most efficient if it's a supporting system and not a transport system on its own. So at least user information on whether they have a public transit subscription or whether this trip was used for feeder trips would be interesting.
Okay, microphone number 2, as there are many people, maybe keep it short.
Okay, greetings from Dresden. Did you know that in Dresden you have 30 minutes of free ride every time you're a student? And have you ever considered analyzing for the length of the ride? Because after 29 minutes you can lock your bike and re-rent it the minute afterwards to have a free ride.
I did this too a few times in Munich, actually, because I had a student subscription in Munich. I think it's valid, actually, for all subscriptions. If you have a subscription with Nextbike, in many systems, you have 33 minutes for each trip. So this swapping chain works for many cities. There is actually a CDF plot in the paper about the length of bike trips. I think you don't see any any steps there, but you might look into this.
Yeah. Maybe adding to that point, I can only recommend reading my dissertation, which actually focuses on the pricing part. So this is actually a very interesting topic, because what we see is this private-public competition. The private ones, scooter sharing especially, charging horrendous prices. You pay €5 for a 7-minute trip or something, which is crazy, because bike sharing is mostly free, and people prefer to pay for the worst vehicle with small tires where you trip over and everything. So there's a very interesting aspect, and yeah, the pricing is actually not really the decisive factor, but it's super complicated and super interesting topic. So happy to discuss it.
Thank you.
Maybe for a question from cyberspace?
Yes, have you looked into obtaining data from other bike-sharing providers?
There is the bikesharingworldmap.com, I think. Look into this, please. Pretty interesting website, and my domain name is a bit a quote on this. There are data sets, at least from Citybike, which are pretty famous from New York. You know the bike sharing world better, right?
Yeah, so we can also refer you to U-Bahn-Verleih again. So he collects on GitHub, so U-Bahn, like the German word U-Bahn, and Verleih. Just Google it, you'll find him on GitHub. He collects most micromobility or even shared mobility APIs that are available. Colleagues of ours at the university also released a scooter sharing dataset just a few months ago. So there's a lot more opportunities, and we hope some of you have time and enjoy doing that, and yeah, release those datasets too, but we haven't done yet.
The dataset also includes some car sharing. You can find it if you look for my colleagues' Herbst, like German autumn, and Subareva, and you'll find the dataset too.
Microphone number 5.
Hi. I was wondering if your analysis did any accounting for cities with competing bike-sharing systems. I'm thinking, for example, in Ljubljana, the Nextbike system has primarily, if not exclusively, e-bikes, because the non-electric bikes are already provided by a competitor. Did you do any accounting for that in your analysis?
We try to include competition as a factor here, but it's pretty difficult. You can look up bikesharingworldmap.com, but you will find only information on which competitors are there and maybe how many bikes are there in a city. But if operational areas overlap, if there's a better pricing scheme for the competitor and so on, that's pretty hard to quantify for us. We haven't included it yet, and this is, I would say, pieces of the puzzle with local domain knowledge that would probably be important to assess your city in depth. So if your city asked you, is bike sharing performing well here, you could, for example, say yes, considering there are competitors also.
Maybe adding to that point, and again, it's a very interesting topic that you touched there, because the age-old question of correlation and causality arises, because mostly big systems work well, but they used to be small systems, people saw, we can earn money here, so they increased system size or introduced e-bikes, just invested more money, if you want to say so. And that is the same, I think, with competition. So a lot of competition basically means bike sharing used to work there well. So again, this is a very important question, all the data analysis here between this causality and correlation, and a very delicate matter when drawing conclusions. Yep.
Thank you.
Microphone number 6.
The question goes in the same direction. Have you had any data on e-scooters in the city that did not perform well?
So we didn't yet combine it, but as we said before, you have both data sets available to download and play around with it yourself. So yeah, it would be super interesting if it competes. Speaking from my dissertation, I'd say they don't really compete because it's different people using them and completely different motives behind using them. So it's, yeah, the danger with e-scooters is far higher to replace walking trips, actually, like super short, few hundred meters trips, and there's no objective reason to do that, and it's just not a particularly smart decision to do it, oftentimes. And the bike sharing users are far more like, yeah, objective in their reasoning, I would say.
Thank you.
So maybe we have time for 2 more questions before we retire to Limassol. Microphone 1.
Hello. You said that a bike trip was defined as the bike disappearing in one space and reappearing in another. Did you have any insight into rebalancing, as in the provider actually picking up the bike, putting it on a transporter and putting it back to a mobility hub, for example?
Well, basically, the Cyprus story is rebalancing only on a very large scale. There are rebalancing trips within the dataset, I can tell you. You can filter for the length of trips. They are typically pretty long, and they pretty often drop off a lot of bikes at a single point. So they collect them and drop them off at a single station. So that's ways to detect it.
Yeah, maybe also to refer for an earlier question, that would also be interesting to get this data, because turns out, from our experience, the operators are not so strict on usage data, but they do absolutely not like to share operating data, meaning like what kind of vehicles, how far do they drive, what routes do they take, what kind of optimization goals do they follow. So that would maybe be a dream kind of data that we would like to obtain, because yeah, they absolutely do not want to share that at all.
We controlled for that and filtered for that within the paper. So for the performance analysis, the filter and the CDF function is in the appendix or something, so you'll find it.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, maybe one final question. Let's do microphone number 3 over there.
Hello, I'm Boris from Hamburg. Hello from Hamburg. We are not doing very well with the TDB, but I don't like your TDB. If I would add 10,000 bikes to Dresden, the TDB of Dresden would drop. So maybe there are too many bikes in Hamburg.
Okay, thank you for that opinion. Maybe a very short question for number 2 if you have a question.
Yeah, it goes to the same question from me. Did you look at if city has very good bike infrastructure, do the TDB increase or decrease because more people have their own bikes and do not use bike sharing as much?
Yeah. So it's actually the autoregressive model throughout that part. We looked into bike lanes, so we gathered them via OpenStreetMap. You can just query the length. It didn't stay in the final model, however, it is still relevant. So again, this is a question of correlation and causality. The question always is, what was there first, chicken or the egg? So was there good infrastructure and then cycling increased, or was there a lot of cycling, lots of cycling activists, and then they started to build the infrastructure? But generally in cycling research, I would absolutely agree that increasing cycling infrastructure is the key ingredient to get more people on bikes, especially also minorities who are not prone to biking, or hardcore cyclists who cycle anyway and don't care about the dangers, but you want to especially address more vulnerable groups who would normally not cycle probably, and the only way to do that is to make it more safer, to make people actually feel safe on the road, and having separated bike infrastructure. So in cycling research, that definitely is a huge factor in how to get people to cycle.
Thank you.
Okay, one final question. Where can people meet you on the Congress if they have more questions for you?
We're absolutely happy.
Sure.
Okay.
Just approach us whenever, or we can also
roam around and look at their social media profiles. Thanks again for the speakers, Big and all those who participated in the Q&A. Thank you.